Good morning everyone, and welcome to this webinar, Responding to Questions from the Audience. I guess one of the things that a lot of people who speak, present, train, one of the common things they say to me is, even when I do this wonderful presentation and everything goes to plan and I come across as confident, I then go to that question time and people start to ask me questions, difficult questions, questions I don't expect, and there's often people in the audience that know as much as me or more than me in some aspects of what I'm talking, and all of a sudden as I struggle to answer these questions, my credibility in the eyes of the audience slowly goes down. So responding to questions from your audience, and whether it's at a formal seminar, a small group discussion, even around the meeting table, responding to questions is one of those great skills to have. If you are good at responding to questions, it gives you that credibility, it gives you that reliability, it also gives you that confidence to agree to take on speaking tasks, to agree to go to a meeting, because you know that if questions come, you will handle them well. If you struggle at questions, you're going to be less likely to put yourself out there. So today's webinar is about some tools for you to better prepare and better equip you to respond to questions from the audience. And welcome to those people that are just joining as I speak. If you want to ask questions as we go, please do so by raising your hand. I've also got a couple of places in the webinar where I will pause and wait and specifically ask for questions. Most of you know me. There's a few new people on the webinar. Peter Dew's my name, and I am a public speaking trainer and coach. And my passion and what I specialize in is helping people find their voice so that you can both confidently and effectively get your message across, get your point of view across, get the information that your audiences need to hear to make decisions to move to a better place in their lives. That is my passion. You have my website and my email address down there. If you have any questions after the webinar or you need more information, feel free to contact me. What are we going to cover today? General tips for questions and answers, just some general information, a model, a framework that you can use should you wish to use this model, and it is quite an effective model. I use it mostly when I'm responding to questions, certainly in a more formal speaking environment, and it's a model that you can adapt. You can adapt to your speaking situation and to your own personal style, so it does have some flexibility. And of course, what to do if you don't know the answer. What are some tips to help you, bearing in mind you've spoken on a topic, you've done a wonderful job, someone's asked you a question and you don't know the answer and you don't want your credibility to disappear. So that's what we're going to cover in the 1 hour webinar. Now, if you don't ask questions, this could be a really short webinar. 2 tips for responding to questions, 2 tips for any time you find yourself speaking on topics or without warning and you don't necessarily know what questions you're going to be asked. Have a structure, which I'm going to teach you, and be prepared. Do your preparation. It may seem a little bit incongruous that I'm asking you to prepare for something of which you don't know what you're going to be asked, but preparation will hold you in good stead, as will having a structure so that when you're scanning for the answer, putting the information together to respond to that question, you don't have to worry about structure. You're going to put that little structure in place. And when you learn a structure, when you follow a structure, all you need to do is filter and bring the information together because the structure's already embedded. So there are 2 key tips, 2 key focuses for preparing for any off-the-cuff speaking, but especially for responding to questions from the audience. Some general tips. I've mentioned preparation is key. What is the audience's expectations? What do they want out of your presentation? You could do a pre-presentation workshop. You could do a pre-seminar questionnaire and get feedback. If you could walk away with 2 things from my workshop, what would they be? What would be most valuable? What do you want to learn from today? Do your preparation. In my webinar and workshops around reducing nerves, I talk about walking in your audience's footsteps and understanding what they want. So do your preparation around understanding your audience. Is the topic going to be controversial? Is there anyone in the audience that you know has a particular opinion or a particular disagreement with your point of view? So do your preparation. Find out as much about the audience, what they want, as you can. Set the rules up front for asking questions. Set the rules. The rules might be, now I'm going to hold all the questions to the end. I'm here for 20 minutes. I'm going to speak for about 12 minutes. Then I'm going to open up for questions. So please hold your questions to the end. In a half day or a 1-day workshop, my rule is quite simple. Please ask questions as we go. There are no questions that are silly, so please ask questions at any stage in this webinar, although I will pause specifically for some question time also. Or if you know you've got a potential heckler, angry person in the room, right up front you can set the rules by saying, okay, we've only got a short amount of time and I know there's going to be a lot of questions. Can I get agreement from you all that we limit it to 1 question per person and then we'll move on to other questions? If you do have additional questions, then please send me an email or I will be available at morning tea or in the lunch break to come and ask questions. But can I get agreement of just 1 question per person? And get the nod. Get the nod. What you've just done is when someone keeps coming back at you with their 2nd and 3rd question, you've got permission from the audience up front to shut them down, to politely say, look, you know, Phil, you've already asked 1 question and we did agree that I wanted to give everyone an opportunity. So please hold that question and feel free to send me an email or feel free to come and see me at the end of the seminar. At the end of my 20-minute presentation, I will remain behind if you want to come and see me. If you are going to do that, set that rule and then shut someone down, you must genuinely and authentically answer their first question. You cannot use it to brush off the first question and then think you've shut that person down, because the rest of the audience will pick up that you disrespectfully or deliberately did not answer their question and now you've not allowing that person to ask any more questions. So you must genuinely answer their question, give them a good response, be polite, and then the audience recognizes that the second question is coming back because they are in disagreement with you, they're a heckler, or they're a little bit angry with you. And they will allow you to pause that person and ask them to come and see you individually. So they're the sort of rules that you can set up front. How are you going to handle your questions? Questions through the MC, questions through the chairperson, questions directly to you. Questions at the end or questions as we go. 1 question per person in a tight, short seminar where you've got a big room and you know there's going to be some contentious issues. Anticipate those hecklers, anticipate those tricky or angry questions. Preparation is key. Preparation will help you anticipate these questions. What one question would you not like to be asked on your topic that you're speaking? What one question, if you were asked it, would make you squirm or feel uncomfortable responding to it? Anticipate those questions and have an answer ready. Have an answer that you can use to address those difficult, those angry, those contentious questions. Once again, preparation, walk 1,000 steps in your audience's shoes just to understand what they might be asking you. Another thing you can do is have a bank of those common questions. And I'll talk about this a little bit later on. But if you present on a topic over and over again, if you are an expert in a particular field, there will be those questions that people want to know all the time. If you're a financial planner, you probably know the 5 most common questions that audiences ask you about financial success, about creating wealth, about protecting your investment. You know the 5 or 6 most common questions, and you can already anticipate them. So have that bank, that library, if you will, of common questions and your answers. And of course, every now and then you will get asked a question that may not be in your bank. You may be asked a question that you don't answer all that well. Add that to your bank, add that to your library. In fact, if you're ever part of a team or you're in a workplace where there's other people with similar knowledge, when you get asked a new question, when you get asked a difficult question and you're not happy with your response, you can go back to your team and you can say, I was asked this question today. I don't think I handled it very well. If you were asked that question, how would you answer the question? Have you got any tips on how best to address this question or this concern that came up in this morning's seminar? And then get the answer, research it yourself, get the answer from other people that may be more senior, more experienced, and then add that to your bank, to your library of questions. And if you're in a team, share those bank of questions so that other people don't get caught out with that same question. The rule is you should only ever be stumped on that question once, that new question, that unusual question once, because after a while you will add it to your bank so the next time it comes up, even though it is a rare and unusual question, you have an answer. Don't end with questions. Sometimes in seminars, workshops, you see the speaker conclude and they stop and they say, okay, are there any questions? I'd encourage you not to do that. I'd encourage you to bring in your questions if you're not having questions as you go. Bring in your question session towards the end of your presentation, the end of your short seminar. Bring in questions, but then leave yourself 2 or 3 minutes to conclude, to sum up, to make that memorable statement, to make that call to action that you want your audience to walk away with. Some of you will know it's called the Rule of Recency. So in about 45 minutes time, apparently, the last words I say on this webinar, you will remember the most recent words I've said, which are at the end of the webinar. That'll be the most recent. You're going to remember them. So take control of those recent words. Take control of your ending. Don't let the questions be your ending, because what it could be is if the last thing that happens, it's 1 minute to go, one question comes up, and the person asks you a tricky, a controversial question, and you don't answer it well, or they put doubt into the audience's mind because of your inability to answer it, or because of a contrary or opposing view, that difficult question, that last words of your presentation becomes your audience's takeaway message. Don't let your message be hijacked by a controversial question at the end. There will be controversial questions. End your question time. Now, are there any more questions? Rather, end your presentation. Okay, no more questions, and then sum up. If you've got an MC or a chair that the questions are coming through, then I'd recommend you brief the MC, you brief the chair. This is how I do my presentations. I know you're going to take questions towards the end, but with 2 minutes to go, I want you to hand back to me. I want you to hand back to me so I can sum up, leave my call to action, leave my memorable statement. If I can be a little bit risky and tell you a true story, my background in the health industry as a medical scientist for 31 years within the health industry. The last 8 years I was working in organ donation and transplantation. When I first started, I was fairly green and I was the manager, and I was required to go out and do talks, education talks around organ donation, heart transplants, lung transplants, livers. How do you become an organ donor? What stops you from being an organ donor? All of that wonderful and really quite interesting information. At one of the schools that I went to speak at early on in my career, I was a little bit unconfident. I lacked confidence, and I used to end my presentations with questions, and it was fairly harmless until one day I just delivered probably the best presentation I'd been able to deliver so far. It came across engaging. These high school kids at Hampton Senior High School were fully engaged. Then I had 5 minutes left, so I thought, okay, I'm going to end with questions. Are there any questions? And a young man up the back put his hand up and said to me, "Excuse me, mister, can you do a penis transplant?" The classroom breaks up in laughter. I'm not quite sure where to go, where to hide, and my response, my bumbling response is, as a matter of fact, I believe you can, but that's not what I was here to talk about. The school bell goes. 400 16, 17-year-old kids go back to their classroom. What is running through their mind? It is not my take-home message that I wanted. It is that funny question, that humorous situation. Did you see the presenter squirm? He had nowhere to go. So be warned. The last statement will be remembered, and don't let someone else hijack it. So there's some general tips for responding to questions. Going to pause for a moment. Please raise your hands or type in questions if you have questions, just on a basic background of doing some preparation at this stage. The basic background of doing some preparation around getting ready for questions. Any questions from the audience? No hands up? Everything clear? Okay. But please do ask questions if you wish. The first bit was around preparation. Now I'm going to give you just a model. I mentioned a structure. And this is quite an elegant structure. It may not work for everyone, and it may not work for every situation as you move through the steps. The first thing to do is to repeat the question, to paraphrase the question, to reflect back to the asker what the question was. This does three things. There's three advantages in doing this. The first advantage is in reflecting, in repeating, in paraphrasing the question, you are buying yourself a little bit of time. As you're repeating the question, you're starting to scan and to organize your thoughts into how I might respond to the question. That's the first thing it does. The second thing it does, certainly in larger audiences, and I was at a seminar just at the University of WA Club on Wednesday, sometimes people ask questions down the front. The speaker, the presenter, hears the question and then responds. Yes, that was a really great question, but I have to disagree with you and would say that's not the right way to go. And you're sitting down the back and you haven't heard the question. So when you repeat the question, it just ensures that everyone in the audience is absolutely clear what the question was. So that's the second reason. You don't need to say, oh, for those of you who did not hear the question, that's assuming we didn't hear the question. No need to say that. Just repeat, paraphrase the question to ensure that everyone hears it while also buying yourself some time. The third reason, the third advantage of repeating the question is if the asker of the question shakes their head from side to side, then you know you've misunderstood the question. Could you repeat the question for me, please, would be the response. Okay, I don't think I've got the question right yet. Could you clarify the question for me? If their head goes up and down in a nod, then you know you've got the question right. As you're paraphrasing, repeating the question back at the asker of the question, and their head nods up and down, you've got the verbal cue, you've got it right. So 3 reasons for repeating the question. Probably no point repeating the question around a boardroom table of 5 or 6 people. It's probable that everyone has already heard the question and you probably did get clarity. So in terms of buying time or getting yourself a bit of time to gather your thoughts, you need to come up with other methods of doing that around the boardroom table. But another small speaking situation, the job interview, for example, it is okay to reflect the question back to the interview panel, especially nowadays when they're asking more and more of those double barrel, triple barrel, 3-part questions. Can you give me an example of when you've used your interpersonal skills to resolve a conflict and it didn't work out? And what would you do differently, and what would you say is the lessons from that experience? It's okay to repeat that question back and even say, look, I'm going to take this question in 2 sections. So the first bit, if I understand you right, is you want me to give an example of when I've used my interpersonal skills and it's failed. I didn't get the outcome I wanted. Okay, then you can go back. Now the second part was something about what would I do differently, or could you repeat the second part? You can do that in a job interview. There might only be 2 or 3 people around the table, but you can do that. So that is the power of repeating, paraphrasing, reflecting back the question as you heard it. This step doesn't give you the right to change the question around so that the intent or the direction is switched to meet your needs. That's what politicians do. This is not media training. I'm not teaching you how to respond to the media where you may hijack the question and tilt it a little bit for your purposes. This is genuine answering questions. The second step, create relevance for the whole audience. And the jargon around this is chunk it up so that it's relevant to everyone in the room. Have you ever been in a seminar where one person has asked a really niche, interesting, specific question that they're interested in, and you're thinking, well, why does that apply to me? And then the speaker spends 5 minutes, 3 minutes, speaking to that person with eye contact only at the questioner, explaining and responding to their niche specific question, and the rest of the audience gradually drifts away and thinks this is not relevant to me. You've worked so hard building your rapport, connecting with all of your audience. Now you're in question times. Don't lose it. It is still a response to all the audience. You do that by chunking it up. Make it relevant. So why should everyone else listen, even though it was quite a niche question? Let me give you an example, and it's probably something that none of you will be interested in whatsoever, so I'll try and make it relevant to you. And let's say somebody asked me, and I was speaking about a general topic of diabetes. Diabetes is one of those diseases that's becoming endemic amongst Australians, and I've just spoken on diabetes. And then someone asked me about the new DNA nanotechnology methodology for diagnosing early onset juvenile diabetes. The new DNA nanotechnology for diagnosing early onset juvenile diabetes, early detection of juvenile diabetes. What do I think about that? As the rest of you think, wow, yep, and you all start to go to sleep, I need to make it relevant to you. So I think all of you out there on this webinar, all of you would have to agree any methodology that enables us to detect diabetes in our kids, in Australian children, that helps them go on to lead normal, long and healthy lives, I think would be valuable. All of you'd have to say, if we can help our kids live normal lives with their diabetes, that would be great. I think this new, now I'm going to drill down and answer the question. So I think this new DNA nanotechnology is promising. It's promising, and it's too early. We need some clinical trials, so it's a watching brief at the moment, but it's looking promising. Thanks for your question. All of you would have to say anything that helps our kids with diabetes is a worthwhile endeavour. Try to be concise. Some people go on, and this comes back to the keep it simple principle. In answering questions, try and get as concise as you can. This comes back to the whole audience. Make eye contact with everyone. What I see is speakers, presenters deliver the entire answer back to the asker of the question. So the other 50, 100, 200 people in the room do not get the eye contact, do not feel they're part of that question and answer session. So please, eye contact first with the asker of the question. Then you reflect the question back to him. If I understand you right, you've asked me what my view is. See the nod. Then eye contact with everyone. Well, my view is, as you create relevance and you chunk it up, that all of us should be interested in this. My view on DNA nanotechnology is that it's early days, but it is looking promising. We need some more clinical trials. I'm looking at all of the audience now. So, yeah, it's looking promising. Thanks for your question. Eyes back to the asker of the question. And I even put out my little hand as a gesture, and I put almost, thank you for your question, with a stop sign. Not a hard stop sign, just a soft stop sign. Thanks for your question, as I point back to the asker of the question. As opposed to palms up, open palms, and saying, does that answer your question? When you say, does that answer your question? You are inviting that person to come back and have another go at you, another bite at the cherry, and then you could deteriorate into a two-way conversation at the detriment of the rest of your audience. So thanks for your question. And the other hand will go out, palm up. Are there any other questions in the audience? Now, the thanking the person for the question, that depends on the seminar. Let's say you are brainstorming, you're facilitating, and you want people to contribute more. Then you would not say, thanks for your question. This would be a situation where you would say, can you add anything else to what you've just said? Is there anything else you'd like to add? Are there any other questions that I can answer that would help you get to that point of view? That would be more around facilitation and brainstorming. But generally, when you're before an audience and you want to run a tight, sharp question and answer session where It doesn't get taken away. It doesn't get sidetracked. It may be contentious. Thanks for your question. The arm goes out pointing to the person with the fingers in a little bit of a stop sign. Thanks for your question. The other hand out. Are there any other questions? So that's a polite model for responding to questions. As I said, around the boardroom table, maybe you don't need to repeat the question. However, it might be good to create relevance, because even though the finance guys ask you a question, you're talking about finances, what is the impact this reduction in finances has on HR and recruitment? And how is the operational manager going to have to change the way you do business to deal with the reduction in funding? So everyone around the meeting, even though you're having a chat with one person about one aspect, needs to know what's the flow-on effect, what's the impact of them in the organisation. If it is irrelevant to everyone else in the room, you could be having this conversation with that person one-on-one. Maybe you don't need to bring this up at a meeting. So do make it relevant. Do make it relevant. In the job interview, maybe you don't need to make it relevant because they're asking your point of view. It's their question. As far as they're concerned, they're on the interview panel. This is already relevant to them. So you can just answer the question. Yes, repeat the question, seek clarity, then maybe you'll jump straight to your answer. Eye contact. One of the mistakes at job interviews, let's say there's 3 people on the panel, is that the respondee, the person being interviewed, just makes eye contact with the person asking the question, and the other people are ignored. So even in job interview, eye contact with everyone. That's my model for responding to questions. If you Google models to respond to questions, you'll find some other models. That model is fairly polite, fairly eloquent, very effective. You can adapt it, you can drop sections out depending on whether you're brainstorming, facilitating, whether you're speaking to a job interview panel, or whether you're addressing the boardroom, the meeting room. So nice model, and adapt it to your own needs. Any questions? I'm going to pause for a moment and I'll leave that model up there. Any questions on the use of that model? Just put your hand up and I'll open up your microphone, or type in the question if you have one. We have a question from Kari.
Hello, Peter.
Hi.
I just wanted to clarify the step 1, repeating the question. You're saying that that's more appropriate in sort of a larger arena, not, you know, not well, you said certainly not around a board table. What about something in between those two?
Okay, thanks, Kari. Kari's just asked me, I've mentioned that repeating the question, the first step, is good for the larger audiences, the seminars, the more formal presentations. Wouldn't use it around the boardroom table. What about something in between? And I guess you need to make that decision yourself. You will know what the audience is like. You'll know whether the audience clearly has heard the question. The only time I wouldn't repeat the question was if repeating the question made me look really silly. So you need to know whether that's 10 or 15 people that, and in I guess a seminar or a workshop setting, will repeating the question to 10 or 15 people sound silly. And if you feel comfortable that it's not silly, then I'd be quite happy to use that. Now, if you're presenting to 4 or 5 people, repeating the question, and let's say it's not a boardroom but a very small intimate workshop, 4 or 5 people, and you repeat. So if I understand you right, you're asking me my point of view. That might sound a little bit silly. That's repeating the question verbatim, word for word, verbatim. However, if it's a complex question, even with 3 or 4 people, if it's a complex question, don't be afraid to paraphrase or reflect back as you understand it. That's really quite a complex question you've just asked. If I understand you right, and there may only be 3 or 4 people in the room, if I understand you right, you want to know this point, that point, and how those two link together. That would be appropriate. So this step in terms of the size and when to paraphrase, reflect, or repeat the question back word for word, I guess you need to make that decision on how you feel you will be perceived. It's, in my view, repeating the question is just, it's an excellent way of buying you some time, and I sometimes don't get the question right. I sometimes don't get the question right. So thanks for your question, Kari. No other questions? Okay. Another aspect of responding to questions is called the bucket model, and I've kind of alluded to that previously. It's about building your bank or building your library of common questions. And each time you get a question you've never had before, you add a new bucket. Now, the bucket model comes from Henry Kissinger, that fairly famous United States Secretary of State. And Henry Kissinger used to say to himself, not out aloud, he used to say, "What questions do you have for my answers?" He didn't say, "What answers have I got for your questions?" It was, "What questions do you have for my answers?" So he had a complete bucket of answers. And then whenever a question came, he would respond from the appropriate bucket. So there would be just 2 or 3 words, key words, that he would hear in the question, and you would understand that this was speaking about, this question relates to quality, this question relates to strategy, this question relates to price, this question relates to environmental issues, this question relates to my ethics and my integrity. So there might be 20 different ways that someone could ask a question, but he would get the keywords and get the essence of the question and pull out from the appropriate bucket the answer. Steve Jobs also uses this model, used that model when he responded to questions. He already had his answers prepared. So it's just about preparation. Now, that doesn't mean that you do what the politicians do, which is media training, and they answer the question by ignoring it and bringing you back to their core message, what they want to say, and they don't want to talk about the question you've asked them. That's not the bucket model. The bucket model is having genuine answers with your knowledge, your experience, your point of view, your honest opinion when asked around this area, but it's concerning price or quality or environmental impact. You pull that answer out. So this is called the bucket model. You may have to add extra buckets every now and then. If you do get asked a question that you know nothing about, and it's a valid, genuine question relating to your topic of expertise, you may have to create a new bucket. When you work in teams, when you work in organizations, don't be afraid to share the buckets. Don't be afraid to add another collective bucket. Maybe someone else has had that question, that left field, that contentious question beforehand, and they have the answer ready for you. This is how I would answer this. You can do that. You can do that. Okay, that is the bucket model. So that goes with how to answer questions. So as you're creating relevance, you're pulling out one of the buckets. You know what the question relates to. You've paraphrased it, reflected it back. Aha, this is a price question. This is a quality question. This is a strategy question. This is an environmental impact question. Got to make it relevant to everyone. And all of you know that environmental concerns are affecting more and more Australians. Then be concise, respond to the question. That is the bucket model, made famous by Henry Kissinger. Questions? Pause for a moment. Okay, moving on. What do you do if you don't know the answer? What are some strategies you can use? Some tips that I've got are simply, now's not the time to make it up. Now is not the time. If you don't know, you need to let your audience know. So don't bluff it. Do not make it up. Your credibility will really suffer. If you don't know the answer, then you need to honestly let people know. Of course, if you don't know the answer and it is a good question and it is relevant, feel free to find out. Agree to find out. If you agree to find out, you must follow through. One of the worst things you can do is to say you will find out and then not get back to them, because your credibility will suffer. Your rapport, your connection will suffer. So if you don't know, don't make it up, because people will have their iPads. They'll have their iPhones. They'll have their devices and they'll find out. They'll check. So don't make it up. I know one speaker and a very good speaker, a professional speaker, earns a lot of money, great negotiator, who says it is okay for you to look it up if you're asked something that you're not sure about. Now, you don't say to your audience, just give me a moment while I Google or look up Wikipedia. He will say, look, I don't know, but let me find out for you, and he'll get them to break into an exercise. So what I want you to do now is just speak to the person next to you. Go back to that model on how to respond to questions. Do you see any times when it won't be appropriate? Just have a chat amongst yourselves for about 3 minutes. Then he's got his laptop up the front. It's already connected to the internet. He's data projecting, and he'll just quickly have a look. Go at Wikipedia, go to Google, or go to the source where he knows he'll find that information, especially if it's sort of medical or data or Australian Bureau of Statistics. You just want to check a statistic out, and then he'll bring them back and say, look, I've just been able to find out in that short time that this is the answer to your question. So agree to find out, but do get back to them. You can ask a colleague in the audience. So thanks for that question earlier on the DNA nanotechnology. I myself don't work so much in children. My specialty is in mature age onset diabetes, but I do notice that in the room we have a colleague of mine who specialises in juvenile diabetes. Bill, would you be able to shed any light on that wonderful question? Ask a colleague in the audience. You can throw it further. You can ask anyone in the audience. In fact, that's a great question about that new DNA nanotechnology. I haven't read that journal article yet. Is there anyone else in the audience that can shed any light on that. So feel free, phone a friend, phone a friend, phone a friend in the audience, or agree to find out, phone a friend after the presentation, after the seminar, and do get back to them. One of the things that great leaders do is, and great leaders have, is that they don't know everything. They don't know the answers to everything, but what they do know is where to find out. And leadership and management is about not knowing everything necessarily, but having the networks. So agree to find out. And you probably do know where to get that question from. So ask anyone in the audience, throw it to the audience, especially if you're brainstorming or it's a discussion. One thing when I go into a presentation, when I go into a seminar, I go in with the assumption that someone in the audience will know more than me on some aspects of what I'm speaking. So go in with that humble approach, even if you are the guru, even if you are the expert in this area in your state. Go in assuming that someone may know more or has just read something that you haven't had a chance to read. And be a little bit humble. So they may ask a question that you don't know the answer, but you can find out. The question may be out of scope. Remember, in some of the basic tips I mentioned, set the rules up front. One of the rules can be, I'm here to talk about the logistics, the operational requirements, but one thing I cannot talk about is the financial implications and the budget. If you are concerned about finances and the budget, you need to go to our CFO, our Chief Financial Officer. I cannot and I will not answer any questions around finances, but in terms of the logistics and the operational issues and requirements, quite happy. Okay, let's get started. So when a finance question comes, because you've set the rules up front, you can say, look, I did mention at the beginning, I can't talk about finances. I'm not financially trained. I don't understand the budget implications. My role is to manage the project from a logistical and an operational point of view. Bill's the person you go to find out your financial questions. Quite happy to connect you with Bill. If you keep getting questions outside of the scope of what you're speaking on, it could be that there's something wrong with your promotional material, something wrong with your marketing material, something wrong with someone who's maybe seen you before, something wrong with the MC who maybe introduced you and didn't follow your script. So we're here today at Peter's webinar to find out how to respond to questions from the audience while getting rich when you sleep. If the MC introduced me as that and people said to Peter, what's your secrets for financial success? I know that something's gone wrong. The audience's expectations and what I'm delivering, there is a gap. Why are you expecting this and I'm delivering that? And this is what I came to deliver. So just be aware that sometimes if you get a lot of questions out of scope, there could be something wrong in the audience expectations. And maybe you didn't do enough preparation at the beginning. Maybe you didn't walk those 1,000 steps in your audience's shoes, or as the native North American Indians say, you need to walk 30 moons in your enemy's moccasins before you can understand them. Maybe you haven't done enough background. So if the questions are out of scope, that could be what's happening. I mentioned also do follow up and get back to them, but with the follow-up, please follow up to everyone. If I don't know and I agree to find out and it's Bill who's asked the question, and that's a great question, Bill, very relevant, but I haven't read that journal article yet. Let me find out and also consult with my friend who's a pediatrician. Let me get back to you. The rest of you are left thinking, but I want to know too. I want to know the answer as well, and I'm going to get back to Bill. Follow up and get back to all of them. How can you do that? If you're running a seminar, you've got everyone's emails, and I'll send all of you an email, Bill's question and the answer that I find out. If there's a conference organizer, or I'm speaking at a school as I used to, I'd get back to the school teacher with the question and the answer that I later found out, and they would then distribute the answer to all the students. I can place the question and my answer on my website, and I'll leave it up there for 3 or 4 weeks. So those of you who are also interested in this new DNA nanotechnology, I can see the eyes rolling in the background, but those of you who are interested, I'll put that question and the answer on my website for the next 3 weeks. So you're getting back to all of the audience. Really important to do that, so it doesn't deteriorate into the two-way conversation. Let me find out for you, Bill, and I'll get back to you, Bill, and the rest of you are thinking, well, hang on, what about us? We would also like to know. So that's some tips if you don't know, some tips that you can use to be more effective if you don't know. Don't make it up. This is not the time to wing it. Fake it till you make it doesn't work in responding to questions that you don't know. Do agree to find out. Ask a colleague in the audience, someone you know is an expert. Ask anyone in the audience. Phone a friend externally. Check the questions are in scope. Set the rules up front and follow up, and do get back. Do get back to them. So there's some tips to do if you don't know the answer. Any questions at this stage? I'm going to pause on the aspect. Any questions on if you don't know the answer? Of course, at job interview, if you don't know the answer to a question, it could well be that maybe you're not the right person for the job. Maybe you don't meet the selection criteria. It could be. And that's not a crime, because generally when we apply for jobs, we apply for promotions, and it's good to stretch yourself. And sometimes you apply for jobs that you may think are a little bit out of your scope. And of course, every now and then we do get one, and we don't get one without trying. So if you go for a higher job and you stretch yourself, and there is a specific question that comes up that you cannot answer because you've had no experience within that area, then it could be that at this point in time you're not suitable for the job, or you're not the best person for the job, but that question now serves as a learning opportunity, so that the next time you apply for a similar job, you can tick off that question. You can get that experience or that knowledge so you're ready. Questions? No hands up. Okay. Wrapping up. I've got a couple of workshops coming up. Winning presentation skills, so not relating to speaking to questions, but just more effective presentation skills, both confidently and effectively. For me, the speaker and the presenter needs to have both. I know some people that really are not nervous at all and are very confident, but they're not effective. They're confident, no nerves, but they just lack effectiveness. Other people are really quite effective. They know their knowledge, but they just don't have the confidence. So therefore they hang back. They should put their hand up and say something at a committee meeting. They should volunteer to run a seminar, but they don't. So 31st of May in Perth, 9th of August in Melbourne and Karratha 23rd of August. They're my next workshops. Webinars, those of you who like webinars, then I have a webinar coming up Wednesday the 6th of June, so next week, next Wednesday, 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. West Australian time, so that'll be evening over East. I know I do set my webinars at different times so that the Eastern Seaboard and the Western Seaboard both have opportunities. 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. sometimes doesn't work for people at work. 5 to 6, this is an evening one, both in WA and over East. You may want to do this one from home. This one's how to present without notes. So you've got a seminar, you've got a 1-hour keynote speech, you've got a workshop that you're running. How can you present and engage the audience without needing to refer to your notes? You've got that speech. How do you deliver the speech without reading your notes? And you will know that people who read speeches often don't connect or come across as genuine and as authentic as you would like. And the reading just means they can't keep the eye contact, they can't attend to the audience. So how can you present without notes? If you want that webinar, then you need to go to my website and you can subscribe. This one, there's a fee with that webinar, so it's only a small fee. So do sign up if you are interested and want to learn how to present. How can you deliver an effective workshop without notes? Any final questions? Now, a couple of you have had some internet connection problems, and just to let everyone know that I do record these webinars, and these webinars are recorded and available for those people who are part of my mentoring program. So I can make them available if you're one of my mentees, and that means if you're unable to attend a webinar, because I can never find a time that suits everyone, if you're unable to attend a webinar live, you can view this webinar in your own time as one of my mentees. So feel free to inquire about the mentoring program. Now remember, the keys to thinking and responding effectively to questions are: have a structure. What is the framework that you're going to use every time you get asked a question? The framework I showed you, that eloquent model. Adapt it, change it, make your own model. And finally, do your preparation. A question and answer session is just a mini speech. Anticipate what you're going to be asked. What is it that the audience need? Build your bank, your library, those buckets of responses, so that no matter what question you get, you already have your answer. Now I'm going to leave it there. Thank you for your attendance. Please make use of the information that you've learnt today, so that the next time you are responding to questions, whether it's at a seminar, at a job interview situation, or at the boardroom table, you can be more effective and more confident in your response to the questions.